The air in the small chapel was thick with the scent of white roses and nervous anticipation. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows depicting a surprisingly fierce-looking dove, cast kaleidoscopic patterns across the worn wooden pews. It was objectively a beautiful day, the kind of day poets write about, painters try to capture, and young women dream of their entire lives. And I was living it. I was getting married. My heart, usually a quiet, steady drum, was a frantic hummingbird in my chest, a tiny feathered thing beating against the bars of its cage. It wasn't entirely joy, not yet. There was a fragile, almost imperceptible tremor beneath the surface, a discordant note in the symphony of my happiness. It was the sound of silence, a silence so profound, so deliberate, it hummed in the very marrow of my bones. I stood at the back of the chapel, just beyond the threshold of the aisle, my hand resting on the cool, polished oak of the double doors. Corvin was waiting for me at the altar, his broad shoulders visible even from this distance, his kind face turned towards the entrance, a soft smile already playing on his lips. His family, a constellation of warmth and genuine affection, filled the first few rows on his side, their faces alight with unreserved happiness. They waved, they whispered excited greetings, their love a palpable current in the room. But my side was a yawning chasm of emptiness. Every single pew, meticulously arranged and adorned with delicate white ribbons, sat vacant. Not a soul, not a single familiar face. The light, which danced so playfully on Corvin's side, seemed to sink into the shadows here, swallowing the space whole. It wasn't just empty, it was absent, a glaring, physical manifestation of a void that had existed within me for as long as I could remember. I had dressed simply, elegantly, a gown of raw silk, ivory, flowing like water, chosen not for extravagance, but for how it felt against my skin, soft, comforting, like Corvin's touch. My hair, usually pulled back, cascaded in loose waves around my shoulders, framing a face that, despite the tremor in my heart, held a quiet resolve. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of roses fill my lungs, trying to anchor myself in the present. Today is about love, I told myself. Today is about new beginnings. But then an involuntary glance went to my phone, clutched in the bouquet of lilies and baby's breath. A small, black rectangle of cold, indifferent technology. It sat there, stubbornly, agonizingly silent. No last-minute text from my mother, a hastily typed "thinking of you" that would have felt like a cruel joke, but at least an acknowledgement. No curt, businesslike email from my father, perhaps a single word of congratulations devoid of warmth, but a sign, nonetheless, that I still existed in his world. Not even a dismissive, pitying message from Cashin, my brother, who had once been my closest confidant before he became a prisoner of their expectations. Nothing. An echo chamber of unspoken words, unsent messages, unfelt presences. The music began to swell, a gentle, soaring melody that was supposed to fill the listener with hope. For a fleeting second, I considered not walking down that aisle. Not because I didn't want to marry Corvin. Oh, I wanted it with every fiber of my being. But because the humiliation, the sheer, crushing weight of their deliberate absence was a physical force. It pressed against my chest, threatening to buckle my knees, to steal the very breath from my lungs. I felt a pang of raw, almost childish longing, to be seen, to be acknowledged, to have just one person from the blood that ran through my veins witness this moment, this profound declaration of self, of love, of choosing my own path. But that was a foolish wish, a ghost of a hope that had haunted me my entire life, always leaving me just as hollow. Then, through the delicate veil that obscured my vision, just slightly I saw Corvin shift. He turned his head further, his eyes sweeping over the empty pews on my side, and then his gaze locked onto mine. And in his eyes there was no pity, no judgment, no embarrassment, only unwavering love. A love so vast, so unconditional, it was a balm to the stinging wound in my soul. He saw me. He always saw me. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. The tremor stilled. The hummingbird calmed. The silence, which had been a suffocating blanket, suddenly felt clarifying. It wasn't an act of cruelty that destroyed me. It was an act of declaration. They had declared I no longer existed. They had tried to erase me. But you don't erase a person. You certainly don't erase a Lyra Vance. You simply free her. As my hand left the cool oak, and I took the first step down the aisle, a single, crystalline tear escaped my eye. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of liberation, of profound, silent understanding. They didn't just skip my wedding. They declared I no longer existed. So I would build a world so large, so brilliant, that their entire universe would become nothing more than a shadow within it. This was not the end of my story. This was the beginning of theirs. The end, I mean. The silence from my family was the loudest sound in the room, but it was also the catalyst for one of the most methodical and poetic revenges you will ever hear. Before we get into how a forgotten daughter systematically dismantled a dynasty, make sure you're subscribed to Poetic Revenge and ring that notification bell, because you're not going to want to miss a single second of this story. To understand the profound, weaponized silence of my wedding day, you have to understand the noise that came before it. Not the noise of shouting or arguments. My family was far too polished for such vulgar displays. No, it was the suffocating noise of expectation, the constant, humming drone of a legacy being built, a performance being staged, in which I was never meant to be a star. I was at best a stagehand, a shadow in the wings, and my greatest virtue was my ability to remain invisible. Our house wasn't a home. It was a museum exhibit titled The Perfect Family. Everything was polished to a high sheen, from the marble floors in the foyer to the carefully curated smiles on our faces at social events. At the heart of this exhibit, in my father's mahogany-paneled study, was the central altar, a grand, glass-fronted trophy case. It was a monument to the Vance dynasty, or more accurately, to its anointed heir, my brother Cashin. His side of the case was a glittering testament to a life lived in the spotlight. Gold-plated debate, trophies jostled for space with lacquered plaques from prestigious internships. There were medals for fencing, framed certificates from leadership summits, a varsity letter in a sport he barely played but looked good doing. Each object was a brick in the towering edifice of his future, a future my father had meticulously blueprinted since the day he was born. My side of the case was less populated. For years it held a single, solitary object, a faded blue ribbon I'd won in the 3rd grade for a small, lopsided clay bird. I remember the day I brought it home, my small hands trembling with pride. My father had glanced at it, offered a distracted, "That's nice, Lyra," before his attention was immediately recaptured by a phone call about a merger. My mother, Eleanor, had picked it up with 2 perfectly manicured fingers, a small, tight smile on her face. "Well, isn't that rustic?" she had said, before placing it in the cavernous, empty space on my side of the cabinet, where it sat for a decade like a forgotten relic in a tomb. That was the essence of my mother's cruelty. It was never a direct blow, always a glancing one, a stiletto heel, cloaked in velvet. She was the chief curator of our family's image, and her critiques were her primary tool. I remember being 16, preparing for the annual hospital charity gala, an event my mother chaired with the precision of a military general. I had saved for months to buy a dress, a simple, midnight blue column of silk that made me feel, for the first time, quietly beautiful. When I came downstairs, my father was reading the financial pages and Cashin was adjusting his tuxedo, already looking like the senator my father intended him to be. My mother's eyes scanned me from head to toe, her gaze lingering for a moment too long. "Oh, Lyra, darling," she said, her voice dripping with a manufactured sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. She adjusted a stray strand of my hair, her touch as light and cold as a snowflake. "It's so brave of you to embrace such simplicity. It really speaks to your nature, doesn't it? Uncomplicated." The room fell silent for a beat. Cashin smirked, a quick, cruel flash of teeth. My father didn't even look up. The unspoken words hung in the air between us. Plain, unambitious, not one of us. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck, and the beautiful blue dress suddenly felt like a cheap costume. I spent the entire evening feeling like a ghost, a pale imitation of the glittering, confident women around me. My mother's words a constant, repeating whisper in my ear. But the true architect of our gilded cage was my father, Richard Vance. His obsession was not just with success, but with control. He believed life was a chess game, and he was a grandmaster, moving his pieces with cold, strategic foresight. I learned the terrifying extent of this one night when I was 17. I couldn't sleep and went downstairs for a glass of water, only to see a light on under his study door. I pushed it open a crack, expecting to see him hunched over legal briefs. Instead, he was standing before a massive whiteboard that took up an entire wall. On it, mapped out in terrifying detail, was Cashin's entire life, a timeline stretching out for the next 30 years. It was all there: Harvard Law, class of 23, clerk for a Supreme Court Justice, 24 to 25, make partner at Vance and Sterling, 31, secure nomination for state senate, 40. Every step was broken down into smaller objectives, with names of influential people to cultivate and organizations to join. It was a military campaign for a life. My eyes scanned the board, searching for my own name, for any sign that I was a part of this grand design. I finally found it in a small box in the bottom right corner, connected to the main timeline by a single, thin, dotted line. It simply said, Lyra. And underneath, in parentheses, secure advantageous marital alliance. TBD. I wasn't a daughter. I was a variable, a strategic asset to be deployed at a later date. My purpose wasn't to have a life, but to be a supporting beam in the life they were building for my brother. I backed away from the door, my heart a cold stone in my chest, and in that moment I understood. Their love wasn't a gift, it was a transaction, and my value was yet to be determined. That was the year I decided to major in psychology. If I was going to be a ghost in their machine, I was damn well going to understand how the machine worked. Then, in the sterile, predictable world of my university studies, a world I had chosen as a quiet rebellion, I met Corvin. It wasn't at a gala or a fundraiser. It was in the campus sculpture garden on a crisp autumn afternoon. I was sitting on a bench, sketching the way the light fell on a large, abstract bronze piece, trying to decipher its meaning. A voice next to me, low and warm, said, "You're looking at it all wrong." I turned, startled, to see a young man with kind eyes, a smudge of charcoal on his cheek, and hands that were clearly familiar with clay and stone. He wasn't dressed in a suit. He wore a paint-splattered work shirt and jeans. He was, by my family standards, a nobody. "Excuse me," I said, my defenses immediately rising. "You're trying to find one single meaning," he said, gesturing to the sculpture, like it's a riddle to be solved. But it's not. It's a feeling to be felt. What do you feel when you look at it? No one had ever asked me what I felt. They only ever asked what I thought, and even then, only if it aligned with their own opinions. I looked back at the sculpture, at its sharp angles and smooth curves, and I said the first thing that came to mind. It feels lonely but defiant. He broke into a wide, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That's it," he said. "That's exactly it. That piece is mine." That was Corvin. He didn't see Lyra Vance, the daughter of the great Richard Vance, the sister of the rising star Cashin. He saw me. Our conversations over the weeks that followed were a revelation. He listened. He asked questions. He was fascinated by my insights into human behavior, my quiet observations of the world around me. One evening, over cheap coffee in a campus cafe, I hesitantly told him about the whiteboard, about my feeling of being an invisible cog in my family's grand design. I called myself a ghost in my own home. I expected pity, the same condescending sympathy Cashin sometimes offered. Instead, Corvin put his hand over mine, his touch warm and solid. He looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "A ghost," he said softly. "I don't see a ghost. I see the person holding the entire house together, the one who notices all the cracks in the walls that everyone else pretends aren't there. That's not a weakness, Lyra. That's a superpower." In that moment, something inside me that had been locked away for a lifetime broke free. To be seen, truly seen, for exactly who I was, it was like breathing fresh air after years in a vacuum. I fell in love with him, not with a reckless passion, but with the slow, dawning certainty of a sunrise. He was my reality in a life of performances. Bringing him home was like introducing a wildflower into a sterile laboratory. The dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. We sat around the heavy mahogany table, the silence punctuated only by the clinking of silver against porcelain. My father assessed Corvin with the cold, dispassionate gaze of a man evaluating livestock, asking pointed questions about his career prospects and 5-year plan. Corvin, bless his heart, answered honestly, speaking of his passion for his art, his dream of having his own studio. My father's expression remained unreadable, but I knew he had already branded Corvin a liability. My mother deployed her usual verbal poison, smiling sweetly as she remarked, "It must be so liberating to pursue a passion without the burden of expectation. A luxury, really." The final confrontation came a week after I announced our engagement. It was another dinner, another silent judgment. When the plates were cleared, my father folded his hands on the table, the picture of calm, controlled authority. "Lyra," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "We need to discuss this situation. Your mother and I are concerned. This isn't a fairy tale. This is your life. We have built a world for you, a world of security, of influence. This artist is a charming detour, I'm sure, but he is a detour. He cannot provide for you in the way you are accustomed. More importantly," his eyes hardened, "he adds nothing to the Vance legacy." I felt a cold dread creep over me. This was it. Before I could speak, Cashin leaned back in his chair, a look of bored condescension on his face. "Lyra, come on," he said with a little laugh. "It's a phase. You're slumming it a bit, having a romantic fantasy before you settle down. We all do it, but at some point you have to come back to reality. Don't throw away everything Dad's built for you over a guy with clay under his fingernails." The casual cruelty of his words, the complete dismissal of my love of Corvin, it was a physical blow. I looked to my mother, a silent plea for help, for understanding. She simply gave a slow, deliberate shake of her head, her expression one of profound disappointment. She reached over and placed her hand on my father's arm, a gesture of absolute solidarity that built a wall between us. My father took that as his cue to deliver the final verdict. "You will end this absurdity," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm, "or you will be choosing a life outside of this family. And I mean that in every conceivable way. Financially, socially, emotionally, you will be on your own. There will be no trust fund, no invitations, no contact. You will cease to be a part of this family. The choice is yours, Lyra. Him or us." He thought he was giving me a choice between a man and a kingdom. He never understood. He was giving me a choice between a prison and freedom. I looked at their three faces, a united front of cold ambition and disappointment. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt a quiet, simmering rage. "Then there's no choice at all," I said, my voice as steady as steel. I stood up from the table, and for the first time, they were the ones who were silent. That was the last meal I ever had in my gilded cage. And as I walked out, I knew they believed they had one. They thought they had cut away a diseased limb to save the body. They had no idea they had just let a virus out into the world. A virus that would lie dormant, mutate, and one day return to burn their perfect little museum to the ground. The first year of our marriage was brutally, beautifully lean. Freedom, I learned, had a taste. It tasted like instant noodles and cheap coffee. It had a sound. The rumble of the ancient radiator in our tiny, fourth-floor walk-up apartment. A space so small you could touch both walls of the kitchen if you stretched your arms out wide. And it had a feeling. The unparalleled warmth of falling asleep, safe and loved in Corvin's arms, without the chilling weight of my family's judgment settling on my shoulders. We had nothing, which meant we had everything that truly mattered. They had cut me off as promised. The day after the wedding, a sterile, legal-sized envelope arrived by courier. Inside was a single check for $1,000 and a one-page document, drafted by my father's firm, of course. It was a formal relinquishment of all future claims to the Vance family estate, assets, or name. My signature was the final nail in the coffin of my former life. I signed it without a moment's hesitation, and we used the money to pay 2 months' rent and buy groceries. It was the last cent I ever took from them. Corvin worked tirelessly, his hands transforming blocks of wood and stone into breathtaking forms in a cramped, rented studio space that perpetually smelled of sawdust and turpentine. I took a job at a local library, the quiet aisles and the scent of old paper a balm to my soul. We were happy, genuinely, deeply happy. But happiness, as my father would have gleefully pointed out, doesn't pay the bills. The rejection letters from local art galleries began to pile up. His work was too raw, not commercial enough, difficult to market. They wanted decorative pieces, safe investments. They didn't understand the ferocious, defiant soul living within each of his sculptures. The epiphany came on a rainy Tuesday night. I was sitting on the floor of our living room, surrounded by piles of psychology textbooks from my university days, a relic of a life I'd chosen in defiance but hadn't yet learned how to wield. Corvin was sketching in his notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. The bills were stacked on our small coffee table, a threatening paper mountain. Desperation was beginning to set in. I looked from my textbooks, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, theories on cognitive bias, studies on social influence, to my brilliant, struggling husband. And then I looked at his art. I saw what the gallery owners couldn't. I saw raw, human emotion given form. I saw longing in the curve of a wooden torso, defiance in the sharp edge of a steel monolith, a fragile hope in the delicate balance of a mobile. And then I thought of my family. They didn't understand art. They didn't understand emotion. But they understood assets. They understood scarcity. They understood branding and mystique. They operated in a world of perception, where the story told about an object was more valuable than the object itself. My father hadn't just given me a degree he considered useless. He had given me the very weapon I needed to destroy him. My knowledge of the human psyche, of desire, of the subtle art of persuasion, was the key. Corvin had the genius. I would build the empire around it. That night, I didn't see a struggling artist. I saw a brand, a luxury good, and I would become its unseen architect. The first thing we did was pull all his work from the galleries that had rejected him. We were going to create our own market. The next step was to create my own identity, a shield to operate behind. I couldn't be Lyra Vance, the disowned daughter. I needed to be a force, a mystery. I chose the name Ariadne. In the old myth, she was the one who gave the hero the thread to navigate the labyrinth and slay the monster. I would be the thread, the unseen guide in the labyrinthine art world. Corvin would be the genius, the artist. Ariadne would be the strategist, the legend. The first 5 years were a masterclass in patience, a quiet, methodical grind. My father planned in decades. I would plan in years, months, and days, with a precision that would have made him proud, had he not been my target. Year 1 was about laying the foundation. I quit the library. I built a website, a sleek, minimalist digital gallery that showcased Corvin's work with stunning photography. But I didn't just write descriptions. I used my psychological training to write narratives. Each sculpture came with a story, an emotional journey that tapped into universal human desires for love, for power, for freedom. I didn't sell a sculpture. I sold a piece of a soul. We started a meticulously curated Instagram account under Corvin's name, but I ran it. No pictures of his face, only his hands at work, close-ups of textures, and enigmatic quotes about art and life. The message was clear. This was about the work, not the man. It built an immediate mystique. Our first sale was for $800 to a design enthusiast in another country. We celebrated with a real bottle of champagne. Year 2 was about creating a beachhead. I knew we couldn't wait for the world to find us. I had to choose our first champion. I spent 3 months researching, not art collectors, but the new money titans of the tech world. They were often insecure about their cultural standing and desperate to prove their sophistication. I identified a young software billionaire known for his ego and his love of disruptive ideas. I studied his online footprint, his interviews, his psychological profile. He valued exclusivity and being ahead of the curve. Through a highly targeted micro-ad campaign that cost us nearly all our savings, I made sure that only he and a handful of his closest associates started seeing posts about a mysterious, ungallery-represented sculptor named Corvin. 2 months later, Ariadne received a discreet email. He bought a major piece for $50,000. I leaked the sale to a single influential art blog, framing it as the tech visionary who discovered art's best-kept secret. The narrative was set. Year 3 was about weaponizing scarcity. The moment the blog post went viral, the emails started flooding in. Galleries who had rejected us a year ago were now begging to represent Corvin. I, as Ariadne, responded to every single one with a polite but firm no. My reply was always the same. Mr. Corvin is currently focused on a new body of work and is not seeking representation. His pieces are only made available when he feels they are ready. I was turning the art world's own velvet rope exclusivity against them. By denying them access, I made them want it more than anything. The demand exploded. We sold 3 more pieces that year, each for over 6 figures. Ariadne became the art world's most frustrating and intriguing gatekeeper. Rumors swirled about who this mysterious figure was who held the key to the world's most reclusive new artist. Year 4 was the tipping point. We received a commission from a world-famous architect to create a centerpiece sculpture for the lobby of his new 5-star hotel in Dubai. The fee was $2 million. I remember the day the wire transfer hit our account. I looked at the number on the screen at all those zeros, and I felt nothing but a cold, quiet hum of purpose. We moved out of our tiny apartment and bought a sprawling industrial loft that served as both our home and Corvin's studio. We paid in cash. The space was beautiful, filled with light, but we still ate noodles on the floor sometimes, just to remember. It was that year, looking out over the city from our floor-to-ceiling windows, that I knew Phase 1 was complete. The foundation was built. The wealth was secured. By the end of year 5, Corvin was not just a name, it was a global brand. His works were selling for 7 figures at exclusive, invitation-only showings that I, as Ariadne, orchestrated. We were worth over $30 million. We had become the ultimate aspirational fantasy, the starving artists who had conquered the world on their own terms. But no one knew the truth. They saw Corvin, the brilliant, reclusive sculptor. They heard whispers of Ariadne, the spectral kingmaker. They never saw Lyra Vance, the ghost from the trophy case, sitting in her minimalist office, moving the pieces on a global chessboard, her eyes fixed on her hometown and the family who thought they had erased her. They had no idea that the fortune I was building was not a home. It was an arsenal. Lyra is literally turning her pain into power, using the very skills her father deemed useless to build her kingdom. It's a masterclass in silent, focused revenge. What do you think is the most critical first step in a long-term revenge plan like this? Let me know your strategic ideas in the comments below. I'm curious to see what you guys come up with. 10 years. A decade is a lifetime. It's long enough for wounds to scar over, for anger to cool into something harder and more useful, like obsidian. It's long enough for a ghost to build an empire. In 10 years, the girl who walked alone down the aisle of a half-empty chapel had ceased to exist. In her place stood a woman who could move markets with a single, encrypted email and whose anonymous persona, Ariadne, was whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence in the most powerful circles of the art world. Our net worth wasn't just astronomical. It was a gravitational force, bending the world to our will. Corvin and I had built a life of quiet, profound beauty, a universe away from the gilded cage of my past. But every night before I fell asleep, I would see it, the image of those empty pews, the deafening silence, the chilling finality of my family's choice. The pain was no longer a hot, searing thing. It had become a cold, dark star inside me, a source of immense energy, of focus. The wealth was the weapon, the anger was the fuel, but patience was the armor of the truly powerful. And my patience was infinite. On the 10th anniversary of my wedding, I decided it was time. The first move in a war is never an attack. It is the unveiling of a grand design, a project so ambitious and beautiful that your enemy is blinded by its light, so mesmerized by the prize that they fail to see the trap embedded within it. My grand design was the Phoenix Foundation. I created it as a nonprofit, endowing it with an initial, untouchable fund of $500 million. Its sole, stated purpose was the conception, construction, and curation of the most significant cultural institution my hometown had seen in a century, the Phoenix Museum of Art and Culture. I chose the name for a reason. I would build a monument to my own rebirth on the ashes of their memory of me. The announcement was not made with a whisper, but with a thunderclap. A press release, issued from a prestigious public relations firm in Geneva, landed in the inbox of every major news outlet in the country. It detailed the scope of the project, a sprawling, state-of-the-art museum designed by a Pritzker Prize-winning architect, a performing arts center, and a public park that would revitalize the city's decaying waterfront. It was a project that promised not just art but prestige, legacy, the one thing my father craved more than money. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. The mysterious benefactor was, of course, the reclusive Ariadne, acting through the Phoenix Foundation. The city's elite were desperate to be involved, and, as I knew they would be, the most desperate of all were the titans of the legal world. Because a project of this magnitude required a lead legal counsel, a firm that would not only handle the labyrinthine contracts and zoning laws, but would also have its name etched into the history of the city right alongside the museum itself. To maintain the illusion of legitimacy, I established a board for the foundation in my hometown, headed by a widely respected, retired appellate court judge named Marcus Thorne. I approached him through a third party, a Swiss legal firm, framing the offer as a request from a client who wished to remain anonymous for philanthropic reasons. Judge Thorne, a man of unimpeachable integrity, was the perfect public face. He would run the selection process. I, as Ariadne, would communicate with him alone. My voice passed through a digital scrambler, my decisions delivered via encrypted messages. I was a ghost, a whisper in the machine, and he was my unwitting public hand. The request for proposal that the foundation issued was a work of art. I wrote the first draft myself, seeding it with the language I knew my father would find irresistible. I used words like dynastic, multi-generational, legacy-defining, and a partnership to shape the next 100 years. It was the most exquisite bait, tailored specifically for the ego of one man, Richard Vance. From my penthouse office thousands of miles away, I watched the fallout. I had a discreet information network in my old hometown, a few carefully cultivated sources, a disgruntled junior associate at a rival firm, a society journalist with loose lips. Their reports were better than any newspaper. The moment the RFP was released, Vance and Sterling Law went into what was described to me as a state of total war. My father, now in his late 60s but still radiating an aura of ruthless authority, saw this as his magnum opus, his life's final, validating achievement. To have the Vance name tied to the Phoenix Museum would be to achieve a form of immortality, cementing his legacy in a way that even his son's political career couldn't. He became obsessed, working 18-hour days, his entire being consumed with winning this contract. And then there was Cashin. My brother, now a senior partner at the firm, was the physical embodiment of the arrogance my father had instilled in him. He was a man who had never been told no, who believed his surname was a key that opened every door. My source told me Cashin swaggered through the firm's offices, treating the Phoenix contract not as a possibility, but as a certainty. Who else could they possibly choose? He was heard boasting in the break room. We are this city. He saw this as his moment to finally prove himself, to land the client that would make him even more powerful than his father. I could picture them so clearly, a scene pieced together from my informant's descriptions. The two of them, late at night in my father's vast, mahogany-lined office, the same room with the trophy case and the now digital whiteboard that charted Cashin's life. Blueprints for the museum are spread out across the massive desk. My father is pacing, his mind a whirlwind of strategy, dissecting every line of the RFP I had written. Cashin is leaning back in a leather chair, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, radiating an unearned confidence. Their emphasis on a multi-generational partnership is the key, my father would be saying, his finger tracing a line on the document. They don't want a firm for a decade. They want a firm for a century. They want a dynasty. And Cashin, with that familiar, condescending smirk, would reply, and we're the only dynasty in town. This is ours to lose, Dad. That woman, Ariadne, whoever she is, she might be new money, but she's smart enough to know she needs old-world credibility. She needs us. I received a transcript of a conversation from a firm-wide meeting, where Cashin presented their initial strategy. At one point, trying to make a point about vision and family legacy, he'd actually said, with no hint of irony, it's about building something that lasts, something that our children and grandchildren can be proud of. It's a shame my own sister could never appreciate that kind of long-term vision. She chose something smaller. Reading those words, a cold, serene calm washed over me. The depth of their obliviousness was breathtaking. They were so blinded by their own self-importance that they couldn't see the truth, even when it was laid out in front of them. My past, my supposed smallness, was the very thing that made me invisible to them, and in that invisibility I had found my ultimate power. They spent the next 6 weeks pouring every resource of their firm into a single proposal. They hired consultants, graphics designers, and presentation coaches. They compiled a 300-page document bound in Moroccan leather, a testament to their history, their influence, their supposed indispensability. It was a monument to their own hubris. And I watched. From the silent, sterile comfort of my office, I watched them assemble the weapon of their own destruction. I reviewed the preliminary proposals from the other top firms in the city, some of which were arguably better, more innovative, but they weren't the target. I instructed Judge Thorne to advance 3 firms to the final round of in-person presentations. Vance and Sterling Law was one of them. The email went out, and my informant told me a cheer erupted through their entire office floor. Cashin took his entire team out for a $1,000 dinner to celebrate. They thought they were one step closer to the prize. They had no idea they were simply accepting my invitation to their own execution. They were preparing for the biggest pitch of their lives. They were rehearsing their own eulogy. The day of the final presentation, I was in my office, a minimalist space of glass and steel overlooking a city thousands of miles away. The sky outside was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a stark contrast to the storm I was about to unleash. I wasn't nervous. I was preternaturally calm, my heartbeat a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. On the large screen before me were 3 windows, one showing the encrypted audio feed from the Foundation's boardroom, one displaying the biometric data of the speakers to analyze their stress levels, and one open to a direct, secure line to Judge Thorne's private earpiece. I was a ghost in the room, more present and powerful than anyone physically there. When it was Vance and Sterling's turn, my father entered first, the silver-haired patriarch, exuding an aura of immense, unshakable power. Then came Cashin, my brother, looking every bit the corporate prince. He was the one who would lead the presentation. The moment he began to speak, I closed my eyes. The voice that came through the speakers was deeper, more polished than I remembered. But the cadence, the tone, that was exactly the same. It was the same smooth, condescending tone he had used to call my dreams of studying psychology a cute hobby, the same arrogant assurance with which he had dismissed Corvin as a man with clay under his fingernails. He was brilliant, I had to give him that. He flawlessly recited the key phrases from the RFP, speaking of legacy and dynasty as if he had invented the concepts. He painted a picture of his firm as the bedrock of the city, the only possible choice for a project of this historical magnitude. Halfway through, I decided to test him. I typed a command, and my voice, filtered through a state-of-the-art modulator that made it sound like a genderless, ageless entity of pure authority, echoed in the boardroom. "Mr. Vance," I said, the name feeling like ash in my mouth. "Your proposal speaks eloquently of legacy. But tell me, what happens when a legacy is built on a foundation that is morally compromised? What is the duty of a firm like yours to the truth versus its duty to its client's reputation?" There was a flicker of surprise, a fractional hesitation. I saw his heart rate jump 2 beats per minute on my monitor, but he recovered quickly. "An excellent question," he began, his voice a smooth cascade of corporate platitudes. "Our duty is to the law first and foremost. We believe that a strong legal framework is the ultimate arbiter of morality in the civic sphere. We operate with the utmost integrity to ensure that our clients' legacies are not only powerful, but unimpeachable under the fullest scrutiny of that law." He hadn't answered the question. He had deflected it, beautifully and emptily. He had proven that his loyalty was to power and perception, not to truth. He was perfect. After the presentations concluded, Judge Thorne and the committee held their deliberation. My private line to the judge's earpiece buzzed. "Ariadne," he said, his voice low, "the committee is leaning towards the second firm. Their proposal is more modern, more agile. Vance and Sterling feel antiquated, too focused on their own name." I let the silence hang for a moment before I responded, my modulated voice cool and decisive. "I appreciate the committee's insight, Judge. However, in this instance, their antiquated nature is precisely what we need. Their deep roots in the city, their obsession with their own name, it ensures they will not let this project fail. It makes them predictable. Give them the contract." I didn't tell him my real reason, that the downfall of a modern, agile firm would be a business story, but the spectacular implosion of a dynasty like Vance and Sterling, that would be a legend. The call to my father was the single, most satisfying moment of my life up to that point. I dialed his private number myself. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with anxiety. "Richard Vance." "Mr. Vance," my modulated voice replied. "This is Ariadne." On behalf of the board of the Phoenix Foundation, I would like to congratulate you. Vance and Sterling has been selected as our lead legal counsel. The silence on the other end was profound. I could hear his sharp intake of breath, the sound of a world shifting on its axis. Then, a booming, triumphant laugh erupted from him. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion and unrestrained pride. "Thank you. You have made the right choice. You will not regret this. We will build a legacy together." I held the phone, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. "Oh, Richard," I thought, "we will build a legacy, but it will be mine, not yours." The celebration, as described to me by my sources, was an event of almost mythological arrogance. They rented out the entire top floor of the Heritage Club, the city's most exclusive and old-world establishment. The champagne flowed like water, the laughter was loud and smug, and the air was thick with self-congratulation. My father gave a speech, raising a crystal flute and toasting to the future, to family, and to a legacy that will stand for 1,000 years. The moment that truly sealed their fate, however, came later in the evening. My mother, Eleanor, looking regal in emerald silk, was speaking with Cashin near the panoramic windows overlooking the city. My informant was close enough to overhear. "It's all so magnificent," Eleanor said with a wistful sigh. If only poor Lyra could see this. If only she'd understood. Perhaps she would finally realize what she threw away for that artist. Cashin took a sip of his champagne, a dismissive smirk on his face. "Her," he scoffed. "Please, Mother, don't waste your pity. She's probably still living in some cramped apartment, perfectly happy with her little sculptures and her simple life. Honestly, it's for the best. Some people are just meant for small lives. We aren't. Some people are just meant for small lives." The words, relayed to me in a text message, burned cold and bright in my mind. That was it. That was the final justification. The absolute, unshakable confirmation that they had not changed, had not grown, had not for a single moment considered the possibility that they were wrong. The next week, the contract was ready for signing. It was a 300-page behemoth, bound in the same navy blue as my father's preferred suits. My legal team in Switzerland were not lawyers. They were assassins who used words as their weapons. And buried deep within the standard clauses, on page 247 was Article 32, Section B, the Moral Turpitude and Reputational Harm Clause. It was a masterpiece of legal brutality. It stated that if any principal of the representing firm, including senior partners and named family members, were found to have engaged in conduct that could, in the sole and absolute discretion of the Foundation's benefactor, bring disrepute, scandal, or public ridicule upon the project, the Foundation had the unilateral right to immediately terminate the contract. But it went further. It gave the Foundation the right to seek punitive financial damages up to the total value of the contract, and, most importantly, the right to issue a public statement detailing the specific conduct that triggered the clause. It was a guillotine hidden in the fine print. The signing ceremony was held in the Foundation's temporary offices. My father and Cashin arrived, flanked by their junior partners, every one of them beaming. Judge Thorne presided. The contract sat on the large oak table, a sleeping serpent. My father, blinded by the sheer scale of his victory, saw the document as a trophy. He barely skimmed it. His own legal team, eager to please their boss who had just landed the client of a lifetime, had already rubber-stamped it. When he got to the signature page, he didn't even hesitate. He took the heavy, gold-plated fountain pen offered to him, a pen I had personally selected for the occasion, and signed his name with a confident, ostentatious flourish. The scratch of the nib on the thick, creamy paper was the loudest sound in the room. It was the sound of the trap, springing shut. He slid the contract over to Cashin, who countersigned with equal bravado. It was done. I had them. My hands are literally shaking right now. The trap is set, the ink is dry, and the Vance family is celebrating on top of a ticking time bomb. If you are living for this moment and can't wait to see their world come crashing down, do me a favor and hit that like button. Let's send a wave of support for Lyra's final move. The night of the groundbreaking gala was the glittering apex of the city's social calendar. The event was held in a vast, custom-built pavilion on the future site of the museum, a transparent cathedral of glass and steel that offered breathtaking views of the city skyline on one side and the dark, whispering water on the other. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, cast a diamond-like brilliance over the 1,000 guests within. An orchestra played softly, a subtle soundtrack to the clinking of champagne flutes and the low, contented murmur of the city's most powerful people. This wasn't just a party, it was a coronation. And tonight, my family were the anointed royalty. I arrived an hour after the event began, entering through a private service entrance and ascending to a small, darkened observation deck I had ordered built for this exact purpose. It was perched high above the main floor, a nest of shadows from which I could observe the entire spectacle undetected. I was once again a ghost in my own home, but this time I was the one doing the haunting. Looking down, I saw them. They were positioned at the very center of the room, the gravitational core around which everyone else orbited. My father, Richard Vance, was magnificent in his element. He stood tall in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his silver hair catching the light, a look of supreme, benevolent authority on his face. He accepted congratulations not as a contractor, but as a king accepting tribute. My mother, Eleanor, was a vision of icy perfection in a gown of shimmering silver, her smile practiced, her posture impeccable. She glided from one conversation to another, the perfect hostess at a party she didn't even throw. And Cashin, my brother, was incandescent with triumph. He moved through the crowd with a restless, predatory grace, his laughter loud, his hand gestures expansive. He was shaking hands, clapping backs, his eyes alight with the sheer, unadulterated thrill of victory. This night was the culmination of his life's purpose, the ultimate affirmation of his own greatness. They were at the absolute zenith of their power, bathed in the adulation of their peers, completely and blissfully unaware of the guillotine hanging by a single thread above their heads. I watched for an hour as the spectacle unfolded, my heart a calm, cold metronome in my chest. Finally, the moment arrived. The orchestra faded out. The lights began to dim, casting the room in a soft twilight glow. A respectful hush fell over the crowd. Judge Thorne, looking distinguished and solemn, walked to the podium at the front of the stage. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonating through the vast space. "Tonight, we stand on the precipice of a new era for our great city, an era of art, of culture, and of a renewed vision for the future. This is all made possible by the extraordinary generosity and vision of one person, a person who, for a decade, has chosen to remain a mystery, a guiding hand known to the world only as Ariadne. Tonight that changes. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound honor to introduce you to the founder of the Phoenix Foundation, the benefactor of this incredible project." The lights dimmed further until the entire pavilion was plunged into a deep, expectant darkness. A single, brilliant white spotlight cut through the black, hitting the empty podium. The silence was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. It was pure, agonizingly suspenseful theater, and it was my design. From the deepest shadows at the back of the stage, I began to walk. I moved slowly, deliberately, my heels making no sound on the polished stage. I had chosen my dress with the care of a general choosing their armor. It was a column of deep, blood-red silk that seemed to drink the light, severe and elegant, with a single, dramatic cape that flowed behind me. My hair was pulled back tightly, my face unadorned except for a slash of defiant red lipstick. I was not the pale, quiet girl they had cast out. I was a queen. I was an executioner. As I stepped into the full, blinding glare of the spotlight, a sound rippled through the crowd. A collective, sharp intake of breath. It wasn't a gasp of recognition at first, but of shock. Who was this woman? Then the whispers began to spread through the darkness, like fire through dry grass. "Is that Vance's daughter? My God, it's Lyra." But I wasn't looking at the crowd. My eyes were locked on the three people standing at the center of the room, their faces illuminated by the ambient glow from the stage. Time itself seemed to slow down, to stretch and warp, allowing me to savor every single micro-expression, every shattering moment of their realization. My mother, Eleanor, was the first. Her practiced smile froze, then cracked like porcelain. Her hand, holding a champagne flute, flew to the base of her throat, her perfectly manicured fingers splayed against her diamond necklace. Her eyes widened, the polite social mask dissolving to reveal a raw, ugly confusion that quickly morphed into a dawning, sickening dread. The champagne flute slipped from her nerveless fingers, hitting the marble floor with a sharp, explosive shatter that echoed through the silent hall. My father, Richard, simply stared. He looked, in that instant, like a man who had seen a ghost. And in a way he had. The ghost of the daughter he had buried 10 years ago. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pallid, waxy gray. His broad shoulders, which had been thrown back with such pride moments before, seemed to collapse inward, as if the very air had been punched from his lungs. It was not anger or confusion on his face. It was a pure, profound animal shock. The look of a creature that has just realized the ground beneath its feet is no longer solid. And Cashin. Oh, Cashin. His smug, triumphant smile was wiped from his face as if by a physical blow. It didn't fade, it was annihilated, replaced by a slack-jawed, gaping void. His eyes, which had been sparkling with arrogance, were now wide, unblinking, and utterly uncomprehending. He looked like a master chess player who, upon declaring checkmate, watches his opponent's pawn suddenly transform into a dragon and incinerate the board. It was the complete and total system failure of a man whose reality had just been fundamentally, irrevocably broken. I reached the podium. I rested my hands lightly on its sides, allowing the silence to stretch for 10, 15, 30 seconds. I let them suffocate in it. I let the 1,000 pairs of eyes in that room turn from me to them, the question hanging in the air, thick and poisonous. Finally, I leaned into the microphone. My voice, when it came, was not the modulated, inhuman sound of Ariadne. It was my own, calm, clear, and resonant. "Good evening," I said. "For 10 years, many of you have wondered who Ariadne is. The truth is, some of you have known me my whole life." I paused, letting the weight of that statement sink in. "My name is Lyra Vance." A second, louder wave of murmurs swept the room. I let it die down, my gaze never leaving my family. 10 years, 3 months, and 12 days ago, I continued, my voice even and devoid of any self-pity, I had a wedding. It was a small, lovely ceremony. My husband's family was there, filling the pews with warmth and love. But on my side of the aisle, there was a stark, deliberate emptiness. Every pew was vacant. My father was not there to walk me down the aisle. My mother was not there to wish me well. My brother, my only sibling, was not there to stand with me. I didn't need to raise my voice. The story itself was the accusation. Every eye in that room, every single one, was now fixed on the Vances, who seemed to shrink under the collective weight of the gaze. "I learned something that day," I went on, my voice as cool and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "I learned that some families value their reputation, their legacy, and their public image so profoundly that they are willing to erase a daughter who dares to choose her own path. They did not just decline an invitation. They made a statement. They declared that I no longer existed. They buried me." I let that last sentence hang in the air, a funeral shroud. "The Phoenix Foundation," I said, my tone shifting from storytelling to a declaration of principle, "was built on the idea of integrity. It is a testament to the belief that beauty, truth, and strength can rise from the ashes of cruelty and deceit. Its name is not an accident." I took a breath and looked directly, unflinchingly at my father. "It is with this foundational principle in mind that I, as the sole benefactor of this project, was recently made aware of conduct by the principals of our chosen legal counsel. Conduct that demonstrates a profound moral failing, a coldness of character so severe that it calls into question their ability to represent a project built on the very ideals they themselves have trampled. Conduct that, in my sole and absolute discretion, has the potential to bring significant and lasting reputational harm to this institution before a single brick is even laid." I picked up a document that had been sitting on the podium. "Therefore, pursuant to Article 32, Section B of our legally binding and fully executed agreement, I am hereby invoking the moral turpitude and reputational harm clause." The silence in the room was no longer just quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and life out of the space. My father's face was a mask of utter horror. He knew the clause. He had signed it. "Effective immediately," I declared, my voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. "The contract between the Phoenix Foundation and the firm of Vance and Sterling Law is terminated." A collective, strangled gasp tore through the hall. A full public statement detailing the grounds for this termination, I added, twisting the knife, will be released to the press in the morning. Thank you all for coming. And with that, I turned away from the microphone, away from the spotlight, and walked back into the shadows from whence I came, never once looking back. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of their incinerated world on my back. I left behind me a nuclear bomb of silence, scandal, and the exquisite, long overdue ruin of the family who had tried to erase me. I did not stay to watch the fallout. As the last word of my speech echoed into the stunned silence of the pavilion, my personal security team, men loyal only to me, materialized from the shadows and escorted me from the stage through a private exit. I didn't look back at the wreckage of their faces. I didn't need to. I had planted the bomb, set the timer, and my work there was done. As I was driven away into the cool, quiet darkness of the night, I felt no elation, no fiery thrill of victory. I felt only a vast, profound, and final sense of peace. The war was over. At precisely 6 o'clock the next morning, as promised, the press release from the Phoenix Foundation went live. It was a document of lethal precision. It did not use emotional or accusatory language. It simply stated the facts, that the Foundation's benefactor, Ms. Lyra Vance, had been systematically and deliberately ostracized by her immediate family, naming Richard, Eleanor, and Cashin Vance for choosing to marry a man they deemed socially and financially beneath them. It detailed this action as a fundamental breach of character, incompatible with the Foundation's core mission of fostering community and integrity. It concluded by stating that the termination of the Vance and Sterling contract was a necessary action to protect the museum's reputation from the moral bankruptcy of its own legal counsel. The aftermath was not a slow decline, it was a demolition. The story was a national scandal. Vance and Sterling, a firm built on a reputation of impenetrable prestige, became toxic overnight. Their most important clients, terrified of the reputational splashback, fled in a mass exodus. Key partners, desperate to save their own careers, resigned in droves. Within a month, the firm my father had spent his entire life building, the monument to his name, was forced to dissolve. It collapsed under the weight of its own hubris. My father, the king, was left with nothing but the ruins of his kingdom. His name, once a key that unlocked any door, was now a mark of shame. He was a pariah, a ghost in the city he once ruled. My brother, Cashin, the heir apparent, was professionally annihilated. The political ambitions my father had so carefully mapped out for him turned to dust. No respectable firm would touch him. His future had been erased as completely as they had tried to erase me. And my mother, the curator of social standing, found herself an outcast. The charity boards resigned her, the invitations stopped coming, and the friends she had cultivated with such ruthless precision now looked straight through her at social gatherings. They who had tried to make me invisible were now the ones who were truly erased from the world they worshipped. Their legacy wasn't just tarnished, it was eradicated, replaced by the very story they had tried to bury. In stark contrast, my star began to rise. The public and the media did not see me as vengeful. They saw me as a survivor, a symbol of resilience who had turned profound, personal pain into a force for public good. I was celebrated not for my wealth, but for my quiet, unshakable strength. The Phoenix Museum was built, a breathtaking masterpiece of glass and light on the city's waterfront. It became the new heart of the city, a place of beauty, learning, and community. On its dedication plaque, the names listed as its founders were not Richard or Cashin Vance. They were Lyra Vance and Corvin. We had built a new legacy, one that would outlive their memory, a legacy of creation, not control. Our own life is one of quiet joy. We are still deeply in love, partners in every sense of the word. We have 2 children now, a boy and a girl, and their laughter fills our home, a sound more valuable than any sculpture or bank account. Sometimes, on quiet Sunday afternoons, we walk with them through the sunlit galleries of the museum, and I watch them look up at their father's beautiful work with wide, wondrous eyes. We have built our own family, a small, tight-knit circle founded on unconditional love, unwavering respect, and the simple, profound joy of seeing each other for exactly who we are. They thought that, by casting me out, they were burying a problem. They thought they were cutting away a branch that would not bend to their will. But they were wrong. They weren't burying a problem, they were planting a seed. The stones of cruelty and rejection they threw at me did not break me. I simply collected them, one by one, over 10 silent years and used them to build the foundations of my own empire. I was never the ghost they tried to make me. I was a phoenix, quietly gathering my strength in the ashes of their rejection, waiting for the right moment to rise and set their world on fire. And that is how Lyra Vance, the Forgotten Daughter, built an empire to erase a legacy of cruelty. Her story is a testament to the fact that the greatest revenge is a life lived beautifully and powerfully on your own terms. What did you find most satisfying about her victory? Let's discuss it in the comments. And for more incredible stories of poetic revenge, click the video on your screen right now. I'll see you there.